Havana in Cuba, an island under intensifying pressure and possibly approaching its breaking point as global crises compete for Washington's attention. A U.S. State Department official says the fuel-starved island appears willing to accept a $100 million aid package. A previously reported part of the deal had been that Havana carry out what the State Department called meaningful reforms to its government. And this comes after an extraordinary meeting between CIA Director John Ratcliffe and high-level Cuban officials in Havana, as you can see there, including the Minister of the Interior. Their discussions apparently mostly centered on military and intelligence issues. All these developments are happening during rare public protests in Havana amid a series of island-wide blackouts. We brought you that to your attention yesterday. Some of these blackouts, by the way, have lasted up to 22 hours a day. And it is a desperate situation that is expected to get worse. Cuba says it has completely run out of diesel fuel and oil under a U.S. blockade. Let's get more on all these strands. Patrick Oppmann joins me from Havana. Jennifer Hansler is in Washington. Patrick, good to see you. Let me start with you. And first of all, this visit by the CIA director, just give us a sense of what the message was there and how it was received in Havana.
Well, it's just striking that the same agency that, for years tried to kill Fidel Castro with exploding cigars and poison dive suits and other ridiculous assassination plots arrived in Cuba yesterday in a big U.S. government plane that said the U.S. government on the side, hardly James Bond material here, and sat down with his counterparts in Cuban intelligence and really laid out to them how the U.S. government, the Trump administration, feels that Cuba is providing aid to the United States enemies, providing areas to operate Chinese and Russian spy bases, is essentially involved in intelligence operations against the U.S. and is working against U.S. purposes, and how this kind of activity needs to end. And if they don't get with the Trump administration's demands, that there will be consequences. And so I'm sure it was a very stark meeting. The Cuban side is saying, well, they laid out how Cuba is not a threat to the United States, but I think we're well past that. The Trump administration has made up its mind. They're giving Cuba perhaps a final chance, in their words, to change its ways or face perhaps more economic sanctions or even tougher measures. Of course, President Donald Trump has threatened to take military action against the Cuban government, and that is something they take very seriously at this moment, considering how badly the oil blockade has already impacted their economy.
And we'll talk about the humanitarian side in just a moment. Let me just go to Jen, because, Jen, Patrick and I were talking yesterday about the possibility, of course, of this offer of $100 million that we're hearing now that the island appears willing to accept. Do we have a sense from this meeting, the CIA, what you are hearing as well, on what kind of reforms they're likely to see, right? They want to see, and how quickly?
Well, Issa, in addition to those security reforms that Patrick laid out that came up in that meeting with the CIA director yesterday, they are also pushing what they describe as economic reforms on the island, essentially opening it up to private investment. This was something that was a key focus of a different visit by U.S. officials last month to the island, where they met with senior Cuban officials. And they were saying they needed to make these economic reforms in addition to those security reforms in the near term, or else they would continue to face a catastrophic situation. Now, it is clear here that these economic restrictions are going to remain in place unless these alleged reforms are taken by the Cuban government. However, the State Department says that they are willing to offer this $100 million in humanitarian aid only if it is given through the Catholic Church or independent organizations on the ground. They say that this is the key string that is attached to this offer, that it has to be distributed through these independent organizations. Now, a senior State Department official said that they have been in touch. They have reached out to the Cuban government through what they described as a senior channel between the State Department and senior leadership in Havana about this aid. Cuban officials have indicated that they would be willing to accept it if there weren't conditions on it. However, it is clear here that the administration is trying to push this message that if the suffering continues, it is not on the U.S., that it is on the Cuban government. So they are trying to inject further anger among that population on the ground that is suffering these catastrophic humanitarian situation there, Isa.
Yeah, and we've seen this anger on the streets in the last several days. Our Patrick Oppmann has been showing us that, of course, of people taking to the streets very visibly, which is something that's very rare. Patrick, let me go back to you. Add this element that we were just talking about there, how rare it is to see these protests. And then these reports that are circulating across U.S. media that the U.S. is making moves to indict Raúl Castro, who, of course, the brother of Fidel Castro. I want to play a short clip from Representative Gimenez, who told CNN this. Have a listen.
Yeah, I'm hearing those rumors too. That there is a press conference on the 20th of May, which is Cuban Independence Day, that in Miami in the Freedom Tower by the attorney for the U.S. attorney down in South Florida. And we're hearing that they're going to be indicting Raúl Castro for ordering the shoot down of the Brothers to the Rescue flight back in 1996, which killed 3 American citizens and 1 American resident.
So Patrick, I mean, how would this be received? What are you hearing about this?
You know, you can't overstate how Cubans who support the government would react to this. You know, this isn't Nicolas Maduro or even Miguel Diaz-Canel, both of them had their critics here. Raúl Castro was one of the leaders of the revolution. He's one of the historical leaders. When you talk to people who support the government, they say they would lay down their life for him, and I tend to take them at their word. This is something that would galvanize the people that support the government. But, I was out last night where there were protests taking place, people risking their freedom because you're not allowed to protest here because they are so desperate, and they just say they want the situation to be over with. You don't care about the politics when the food is spoiling in your fridge and your kids have nothing to eat, and the power is off for days and days, and you might get power for an hour or 2 a day, not enough to charge your cell phone. If you can imagine that, it's really not enough to live. So I think a majority of Cubans that I interact with on a day-to-day basis, they just don't care about the politics between Miami and Havana. They want to have some kind of decent life. But I've also lived in Miami, and I know that for many people there who have suffered, who fled the Cuban Revolution, even though Raúl Castro is 94, he's on his last legs. We saw him on May Day. He is an old man, and I can't imagine putting him at this age on trial if he would even live to see that trial. If it would certainly not be easy to take him, but certainly the United States government, seems to be going down that road. Again, though, for the majority of Cubans, they just want the power to be on. They want to live a normal life. They want things to get better when, in fact, things only seem to be getting worse.
Indeed. Patrick Oppmann, Jennifer Hansler, thank you very much.
As the humanitarian crisis in Cuba worsens, a U.S. State Department official tells CNN that Cuba's government is considering accepting $100 million in U.S. aid. The island is dealing with a deepening energy and economic crisis, recently made worse by a U.S. blockade on oil shipments. One Cuban woman described the dire situation to CNN.
Los niños están sin comer, sin ir a la escuela, estamos desesperados. Las mujeres estamos ya hemos bajado 20 libras y los nervios muy mal, porque no tenemos cómo sustentar a los niños.
On Thursday, CIA Director John Ratcliffe met with Cuban government officials in Havana. This comes just days after President Trump claimed that Cuba was a, quote, failed country asking for help. We're joined now by former CIA case officer Kevin Carroll. Kevin, thanks so much for being with us. The CIA and Cuba have an unpleasant history, to say the least. What do you make of this visit from Ratcliffe?
So I'm sort of surprised that they sent the CIA director down. Sometimes agency directors do undertake diplomatic tasks, but really they've got an agency to run, with other missions. Apparently, the asks that Director Ratcliffe went down there with are there's a Chinese and a Russian signals intelligence collection stations to them, and he wants those shut down. I'm sort of surprised that's the ask. I would be more curious about what's behind the anomalous health incidents with CIA officers that started in Havana. It's called Havana syndrome for a reason. I think signals intelligence collection is a fact of life, but the brain injuries that are being given to agency personnel are really a more urgent issue.
Much of that remains a mystery, as you well know. I also think it's notable that the CIA director and the CIA generally was so public Because it's one thing to go down and have a meeting behind closed doors. They're publishing photographs of this meeting with people's faces blurred out, albeit, but it's still notable that this is being broadcast. What's the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, it's strange. There have been times in the past where the U.S. government has needed to reach out to countries with whom we lack diplomatic relations, and sometimes CIA can be the right way to do that. But I'm not sure why they're making it so public. And again, I think it really undermines the Department of State. You've got Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner conducting the negotiations with Iran and with Russia. Now you've got the CIA director conducting negotiations with the Cubans. I mean, should they shut down Foggy Bottom?
Yeah, that's notable. In the meeting, Cuban officials claim the regime does not constitute a threat to the national security of the U.S. and does not harbor or fund terrorists. They're sort of arguing against the designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terror. I wonder where your assessment is.
Sure. I mean, the Cubans are a threat in as much as they have a very aggressive foreign intelligence service, the DGI, that's had a lot of success against the United States. I mean, they've penetrated the Pentagon, the State Department, the FBI, and they've given a lot of false information through double agents to CIA. They sometimes host Russian forces there, but I wouldn't say that they're really a threat to the national security of the United States in the same way that they were obviously in the 60s with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and even through the 80s when they were supporting the Sandinistas in Nicaragua and so forth. I think the Cubans are sort of consumed by their own problems now more than looking to undermine us.
Sure. So what do you make of China's footprint in Cuba? Because you mentioned those military installations, spying facilities, and as of CNN's reporting of a few years ago, there were plans to expand that.
China is getting extremely active in the Western Hemisphere and in Africa as well. It's a real worry, and probably should have been one of the subjects of discussion in the summit in Beijing. But at least according to reporting, didn't come up. It looks like a bunch of real opportunities were missed in Beijing, and America got a bad result there.
Just to hit on what we started with, that $100 million offer in aid, we heard Secretary Rubio tell NBC News that there are no strings attached, but that he doesn't want to see any of that money go to the government in Cuba. Of course, it's a centrally planned economy, so at some point, I imagine that those dollars, those goods will pass through some government hands, won't they?
Of course, and there was all sorts of justified criticism of the Obama administration for giving a lot of money to Iran as part of the Iran nuclear deal, because it was inevitably going to go to their Quds force and so on and so forth. Yeah, of course. I mean, if we're going to give $100 million to a communist command economy, part of it's going to go to their security services.
Fascinating. Kevin Carroll, thanks so much for walking us through that. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Of course.